fellow quilters. I am so glad you joined me for my little brief tutorial on reading a quilt pattern. So why am I doing this? Well, like many designers, I'm getting ready for Quilt Market, and part of getting ready for Quilt Market means not only making quilts, but hey, then you got to write the patterns for them. And I got to thinking, hey, I wonder if everyone is just like me, or maybe not. I'm not a big instruction reader, but I get that they're totally necessary, because isn't that why we buy patterns? We buy patterns because somebody else has figured out the hard part, which is, how do I make this? Right. I mean, you might could figure it out on your own, but really isn't part of the obsession with quilting is you get your fabric and then you're ready to sit down in front of the sewing machine and start stitching away and creating that fabulous project. Of course it is. So I thought, hey, let me give you my perspective on reading a pattern. Now, there's a lot of different approaches, so if you have a different approach, that is great. In fact, if you want to share tips with me on what you think is the best way to approach a quilt pattern and a project, that would be awesome, because don't we all learn from each other? Absolutely. So here's what I want to share with you. You get your quilt pattern, you go to the store, you pick out your favorite. Of course, your favorites all have the Tamarini's logo on them, right? Well, maybe not, but that's okay. So you pick out your favorite pattern, you look on the back, because almost every pattern I know of says on the back of it, here's what you need to make this quilt. All right, so you go, you make your selections in the quilt store, you pick out your favorite fabrics. That is so much fun, right? And you get them cut based on the pattern, and you come home, and now you're ready to start, right? Well, hold on just a minute. You want to really go through the pattern carefully. Now, show of hands, how many people read through the entire pattern before you start? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Most of us don't, but it really is a good idea to take that pattern out of the package, open it up, and read through all of the instructions carefully. And I mean all of the instructions. Before you put scissors or rotary cutter to fabric, read through everything. Okay, make sure you understand the language that the designer wrote the pattern in. Did the designer say cut a strip of fabric? I am guilty of that. I will admit that. What is a strip? Well, a strip usually is width of fabric, okay, which means selvage to selvage. Did the designer say cut a square and then cut that square in half corner to corner? What does that mean? Well, here's a square. Yes, I prepped ahead of time for you. Here's a square, and if I take that square and cut it in half, corner to corner, whoops, trying to peel these away from each other, then I'm going to end up with two half square triangles. Going to use the whole chest as a demo board. See, I have my square, I cut it in half corner to corner, and I have two HSTs. Did you ever wonder what HST was? Half square triangle. Yes. Or I have a square and I cut it in half corner to corner twice. Why? Because then I end up with QSTs. Did you ever wonder what QSTs were? Quarter square triangles. Right. So that's the cutting. All right. Did the designer say to do any subcutting? All right. Subcutting is when you cut a strip or you cut a piece of fabric and then you cut that into smaller pieces. All right, so you've worked through the cutting directions, you've looked at it, and you think, I've got a pretty good grip on this. So, okay, Tammy, I'm ready to cut my fabric and go. Not just yet. Show of hands again, how many of you do a sample block out of scrap fabric before you cut up that precious, gorgeous fabric that you are just dying to put into this one quilt? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. But it really is a good idea. Grab your scrap basket, okay, and cut up some fabric into the shapes that you need to make a block. Now, how do you know which fabrics go into the block? Well, because you read through the entire pattern to see what did they say about how do I make a block. That's how you know. So you cut up your scrap fabric from your scrap basket, you make up a sample block, and you compare your block to the instructions. Does it look the same? Did it come out the same size? If the answer is no, why? Why is that? Well, maybe your seam allowance is too big or too small. Now, I get it. Tammy, I have a 1/4 inch foot on my machine. I am sewing using the edge of that foot as my guide, so it must be right. Put a ruler to it. Let's check that. You may find that your 1/4 inch is larger or smaller than a traditional 1/4 inch. For example, on my machine, maybe it's just me, maybe it's my machine, I don't know. What I do know is I have to move my needle over a couple of clicks to get an accurate 1/4 inch. If I don't, my 1/4 inch is a little bit too large. And if I'm sewing a particularly challenging block, I might do a scant 1/4 inch, which means I'm a couple of threads in or a couple of threads smaller than a traditional 1/4 inch to give me a little bit of wiggle room. Those are the kinds of adjustments I can make if I make that sample block first before I cut into my precious, luscious fabrics that are designated for a specific quilt. Okay, so I'm telling you, do that. Now, here's a little tip. If you're going to do that, if you're going to say, okay, that actually sounds pretty smart, and I think I might try that because I've had some bad experiences in the past. Here's a little trick, a little tip. You have a stack of fabric that you're not quite sure what you're going to do with. Haven't designated it for any particular project. Let that become your sample block stack. So here's what you do. Every time you start a new project, you pull out that stack of fabric, you cut the fabric to make your sample block or blocks for the quilt, you make that block, and then you put it all back together, storing it together. So what happens? Well, after you've made several quilts, and how many of us make several quilts? That would be me for sure. You will find that you have a virtual library of quilt blocks all in coordinated fabric. So now you have a sampler just waiting to be put together. And so it's like a twofer, and I do love twofers. If I'm going to do something, I want the most bang for my buck. So you can pull out your scrap basket. I keep my large scraps like this. You may keep yours color-coded. I know some people keep them in drawers by color. You may keep yours with the yardage, whatever. So you can pull out your scraps, or you can have a designated stack or collection of fabrics that's going to be your sample fabric so that long-term you can have that sampler as well. So making the sample block will save you a great deal of grief. It'll give you a better idea too of, do I agree with how they put the block together, or is there a way that would work better for me? Because here's the other thing. I'm a designer. I write the patterns for my projects the way that makes the most sense to me, or is the easiest to explain to help you understand how to get there. But this is the thing that I love about quilting. There's more than one way to approach almost everything. And it doesn't mean that one way is right or wrong compared to the other if the end results get you what you need. So that's the other thing that working through that sample block will help. It'll help you figure out, do I agree with their approach, or is there another approach that works for me? For example, when making half square triangles, okay, HSTs, you can cut HSTs and you can make HSTs, half square triangles. There's a myriad of ways to make half square triangles. You can put two squares together, draw a line, sew a 1/4 inch on each side of the line, cut and press. You can use thangles. You can use triangles on a roll. You can use a stencil. Is one better than the other? Maybe it's better for you. So it's all about what works best for you. So that's what reading through the pattern will do for you. It will also give you an idea of what to expect. So you're reading through the pattern first before you even put scissor or rotary cutter to fabric. You make the sample block. You have an idea of the progress of what's going to happen with that quilt so that you can keep the steps clear in your head. That's why the patterns are there, right? The instructions to walk you through the whole process, to give you the opportunity to reach out to a quilting friend and say, hey, what do they mean by this? Or do you ever Google something? I mean, I Google a lot of terms. If there's something I'm not quite sure of, I Google it. I may go look for a YouTube video, which is why I'm doing this video, so that you have some visual instruction that can help guide you, okay? Reading through the pattern will also help you just in case the designer forgot to list something that you need to make that project. Do you need fusible? Do you need template plastic? Do you need a marking tool such as a Choco liner or a pencil? Do you need a special thread? Or do you need something else, fiber fill or some type of embellishment or a specific foot or a specific tool? Reading through the pattern will help you understand, what do I need to complete this project. It also gives you an idea to think about how you want to finish the project, because if you've read through it, they're talking about adding borders, because that's probably going to be one of your last steps, and then sometimes they may give suggestions on how to quilt the project or how to finish the project, how to bind the project. And then some are very straightforward, traditionally quilt as desired, bind with your binding strips. But it gives you some time as you're stitching to be thinking about that, to be thinking, how do I want to approach this project? So these are just some very simple, little, easy, quick tips to get you through. But doing this, taking the time to read the pattern thoroughly, make that sample block ahead of time, and then think about, how do I want to put the quilt together? Do I want to do the whole quilt? Do I only want to do a few blocks because I really just need a mini quilt, but I love the block, just don't need the whole quilt? This gives you that opportunity to work through those things, and hopefully you'll have the best project ever. Now, if there are any other tutorials that you would like to hear, if you want to hear my perspective on something, please drop me a line, shoot me an email. You can find me on www.tamarinis.com. You can find me here on Facebook. Obviously, I will come up with some things that I think you might be interested in, but I would love to hear your thoughts on tips, tricks, and tutorials. Until then, happy stitching.